Welcome to Echo Forge, dark fantasy and sci-fi stories from the edges of forgotten worlds. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next vision. Now, let's step through the gate.
Light from his instruments painted the corridor in stark fluorescence, illuminating tangles of wires and exposed panels. He knelt to mount a camera at floor level, his breath steady, the sharp lines of his jaw set with a fierce determination. "Next section," he said, moving to where the corridor branched in two directions. The ship's bones creaked, a sound like distant mocking laughter that he pointedly ignored. He knew what it was trying to do, and he was resolved not to let it undermine his efforts. Each camera, a tiny eye on his hidden adversary, clicked into place as his presence moved on. He stepped back, surveying his work with the air of a man marshalling his defenses. A sea of monitors stared back at him, their feeds casting eerie shadows across his face. Images of the ship's interiors blinked in and out, plagued by bursts of static that left his muscles taut and his jaw clenched. Yet in the fluttering of distorted pictures, his resolve only hardened. This was a battle he intended to win, a game of nerves he would see through to the end. A fleeting smudge of darkness on the screen made him lean in, his eyes narrowing. Was it real or just another of its tricks? He wouldn't give in to doubt. He punched commands into the console, adjusting the angles, logging each connection. "Camera 2, he said, watching the image snap into clarity before fizzling again. He knew he was close, too close for comfort, but maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what it needed, a boldness that matched its own. "Living quarters," he said, spinning to face the next leg of his expedition. He moved again, the corridors as silent and empty as tombs, despite his words filling them with grim purpose. His shadow trailed behind him, stretching, bending with the slight movements of his arms as he installed yet another camera. How long had it been like this, watching him, toying with his senses until he hardly trusted his own eyes? The image feeds kept streaming as he crossed the threshold into the main console area. There, he had stationed monitors on all sides, creating a digital bastion from which he would mount his resistance. "Beginning power reroute," he declared, the buttons clicking under his command like a volley of gunfire in the quiet room. If the entity was aware of his efforts, he thought with a grim satisfaction, it would soon know just how far he was willing to go. The flickering footage danced in response, half-formed figures flitting at the edges of his vision before fading into obscurity. This was its play, making him see, hear, and feel what wasn't there. But he had learned. The haunting would have to try harder to unhinge him now. Every looped feed on the monitors, every shadow and every sudden glitch spoke to him of the lurking force he was drawing out of hiding. He faced the screens, his own reflection a spectral presence among the ship's pale interiors. As much a prisoner here as a master of his domain. The hum of the vessel droned on, the low frequencies so omnipresent they seemed to vibrate in his very bones. Would it come for him next? Would it show itself now that he had mapped out its domain with such tenacity? "Adjusting output," he muttered, hands never pausing, never hesitating. The monitor feeds flickered, an unsettling orchestra of dark corners and metallic surfaces. Somewhere in the flurry of images, he sensed a change, a new urgency. It was close. So very close. But what was it? What could it want from him? The explorer stepped back, chest rising and falling in measured breaths. The harsh lights blinked in sequence, and he was a solitary figure amid a forest of technology. The watchful eyes of his cameras standing guard over his solitude. The room echoed with the silence of things about to happen. Shadows loomed larger than life, and his fingers, stiff with effort and focus, punched in the final command. Then, slowly, the feed shimmered, grew stronger, and showed him a single undeniable truth. He was not alone. In the hydroponics bay, the explorer found a fleeting sense of peace among the rows of meticulously arranged plants. Their vibrant green leaves, dusted with dew, rustled like whispered reassurances under the soft hum of life support systems. It was the closest thing to life on this haunted vessel, but his moment of calm shattered when a vivid projection materialized, a ghostly image of his ex-wife, terror in her wide eyes, pointing urgently behind him. He spun, heart pounding visibly in his racing steps, but the glass walls and cultivated flora remained unchanged, taunting him with their serene presence. Her frozen scream lingered, mingling with the ambient clatter of water droplets and distant mechanical whirs, and he was left alone again in his floating prison. He lingered there, his breathing harsh in the otherwise tranquil space. How long had it been haunting him like this, using his own memories as its weapons? He ran a hand through his hair, damp from exertion or perhaps from the psychological weight of the encounter. He took a step back, surveying the orderly rows, and fought the urge to flee from this ghost ship that refused to let him go. The leaves' gentle rustling had been the only sound until now, lulling him with a deceptive sense of normalcy. It felt like life, like a forgotten promise that he could reclaim it if he only tried hard enough. But the past was never that simple, never that forgiving. The entity had seen to that. It knew his fears, his regrets, knew exactly what to show him, how to unnerve him with its uncanny understanding. The projection's haunting clarity left a lingering chill. His ex-wife, the spectre that haunted him, even more so than the alien force manipulating his ship. He heard her voice in his mind, saw her eyes, wide, terrified, accusing, as they stared into his very soul. The effort to control his racing heart made him light-headed. He leaned against the cool glass wall, seeking an anchor in the tangible world. He shut his eyes, but the image wouldn't leave. Her pointing finger, her silent scream. It replayed with an insistence that threatened to unravel him. He willed himself to remember that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. Just like the ship's sudden jarring noises, its flickering lights, the dark presence that crept along the corridors. It was all the entity's doing, not hers, never hers. It was relentless, though, and he knew it wouldn't stop. Not until it had him, not until it had said whatever it needed to say. He opened his eyes, defiant, and found the plants staring back with passive green insistence, as if they too were waiting to see how long he could last. The rumble of machinery filled the bay, the only pulse of life in this dead space. Each drip of water echoed, its rhythm taunting him with the certainty of something happening just out of his sight. This was not the quiet ship he had once commanded. Number it was more alive, more sentient than anything he'd ever imagined. He wondered if it would show him the projection again, or if it had moved on to another, even crueler trick. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking, splitting the air like a poorly aimed weapon. He felt absurd, like a child calling out to banish shadows from the room. Yet he couldn't help it. The uncertainty was worse than facing whatever awaited him. He knew the entity wouldn't answer. It never had. It only showed him things, only dredged up pieces of his own past to torment him. But saying it out loud gave him something to hold on to, some measure of resistance against the consuming unknown. The ambient clatter of the bay persisted, and he imagined that it laughed at him. Laughed, or maybe cried, a sound that became indistinguishable from the memories of her scream. He walked deeper into the rows, trailing his fingers along the leaves, feeling the fragile life beneath his touch. Would this be the last part of him to break, or the first? The question gnawed at him as much as the insistent vision had. When had the ship become so unfamiliar? Was it before he had set foot on it with the determination to start anew? Before it had slowly revealed itself, piece by sinister piece, to be his captor rather than his savior? The certainty of its haunted corridors was growing harder to deny, even for him. The more he tried to grasp at what was real, the more it slipped away, leaving him adrift in this silent, mechanical void. And always he heard her voice, the voice of the vision. Behind you, like a curse or a plea. Each repetition wormed its way deeper into his mind, fusing with the soft din of machinery and the distant hum of the ship's systems. He covered his ears, knowing it was futile, that this haunting didn't obey the rules of sound or space or sanity. He stopped in his tracks, allowing the flood of sound and silence to crash over him. The distant mechanical whirs, the rhythm of the droplets. It created a chaotic symphony that left him dizzy, struggling to maintain his footing in a world that was unraveling around him. If the ship wanted to be his prison, it was succeeding. The once orderly spaces closed in, transforming into a maze of confusion and relentless memories. Nothing changed, and everything changed. The ghostly image returned again, each iteration more vivid, more desperate. His ex-wife, forever frozen in that instant of terror, now felt almost like a physical presence, more real than anything he could touch or see. He knew, finally, that the entity was reaching a crescendo, that its grip on him had tightened, and it was ready to show him what he feared most. He was trapped in the ship, in his mind, and maybe it had always been this way. But the overwhelming presence couldn't keep him from his own last defense, the voice in his head, louder than the visions. It isn't real. It isn't real. Yet even that was starting to sound like another of its deceptions. He braced himself against the onslaught, a single figure lost in a universe of memories that weren't his to escape. The control room held its breath as the explorer stared into the grainy glow of the central monitor. Apparitions swept across the flickering display, silhouettes and shadows dipping in and out of the screen's uncertain fidelity. They appeared almost familiar, these passing figures, but the malfunctioning panels cast too many ghostly doubts. The room trembled around him, his ship of long, narrow corridors and dark intentions. When the explorer paused the tape, a familiar silhouette floated near the storage bay. "Not again," he muttered, suspicion edging each syllable like broken glass. His fingers traced the time codes, precise and deliberate, as he logged each occurrence in his electronic notebook. "Entry 237, Port Corridor," he noted in terse, clinical precision. "Entry 237, Port Corridor," he said again, this time to himself. Rewinding the evidence and pausing again. The ratio of his silence to brief remarks wound tight as a spring, ratcheting up the oppressive tension with each scrutiny and each repetition. Fleeting and spectral, the apparitions continued to bleed across the monitor. The explorer leaned forward, eyes narrowing, suspicion coiling within him like a dormant snake. He replayed the sequence, isolating the passage of what could be figures or memories or something more alien, until the control room felt overrun by their spectral presence. Each loop seemed to strip another layer of reality from the scene, until nothing remained but shadows and static. The room swayed in dim uncertainty, panels casting long, pale ghosts against the walls. He stopped the footage again at the same haunting point and let his pen hover above the screen's reflection. "Entry 237, Port Corridor," he repeated, voice weary yet insistent. His log filled with terse annotations, a record of apprehensions. Starboard cabin, junction C, habitation deck. The positions and intervals played out like a measured countdown. Like signs, a mind not quite his own added. He logged each with an unsteady hand, entries building like storm clouds on his electronic notebook. They kept coming, one after another, against every prediction of probability or sanity. "Not again," he muttered, words clinging to his growing frustration like debris in a vast tide. His ship of dwindling explanations and growing doubts. The monitor refused him rest as he watched the familiar figure drift along the passage. It was so sure of itself, this apparition, gliding past the failing sensors with eerie grace. The explorer paused, rewound, and watched it pass again. With each viewing, it seemed less a mistake of technology and more an assertion of intent. He logged the same occurrence 3 times before the repeated words turned hollow and afraid. The tension between the silent control room and the flickering phantoms pulled tighter around him, a snare he could neither evade nor comprehend. "Port Corridor, entry 237, not again." The weight of it closed in, an unavoidable convergence. His eyes traced patterns of persistence across the screen. It played and paused with unbearable slowness, his expectations growing with every suspended moment. The digital notebook filled with bleak insistence, a history he couldn't escape. "Entry 238, entry 239, he added, giving numbers to the dread. The figures wandered through the corridors of the ship and his thoughts, leaving the barest hint of awareness that slipped through his logic. The explorer fought for composure, for a foothold of rationale. "Too many coincidences," he said to the unmanned, watching screen. And then the control room trembled around him, a slow, creeping certainty. He scanned the tapes again, flicking from one section to the next in deliberate calculation. uncovering more than he had wanted to find. "Not anomalies," he murmured, his voice just above the crackling hum of faulty equipment. It all appeared too deliberate, too knowing. As each apparition lingered and each shadow refused to fade, the explorer watched his theories crumble like burnt-out stars. He rubbed his eyes and braced against the monitor's insistence, breathing in the realization as it pressed down like atmospheric decay. They were signs, sentient and relentless, revealing themselves in suffocating succession. Entry 240, storage bay, port corridor, again and again. He repeated the last entry as though conceding to a force beyond his comprehension, a distant intelligence he couldn't begin to understand. His hand grew slower over the last notes, more reluctant, until he could do nothing but wait for the visions to speak their final truth. The corridor stretched like a dark intention as the explorer left the control room, his footsteps trailing suspicion in their long, echoing wake. The ambient hum of machinery pressed close, but the explorer followed more than the ship's narrow paths. He pursued the uncertain figures and shadows of his imagination, apparitions more knowing than vague recollections on the monitor's screen. They pulled him into the depths of the vessel's haunted structure, into the dim corridors where another, almost imperceptible sound set its insistent rhythm against the hull. The explorer stopped abruptly, feeling the pulse of its proximity, its urgency. Kneeling, he opened a diagnostic panel and attached a sensor to the trembling wall. He watched as his doubts materialized into cold, empirical certainty on the screen. "Hull integrity compromised," he announced, words clipped and deliberate against the mounting dread. His hand stayed steady as he marked the readings on a digital map, suspicion giving way to clarity and the fearful possibility of purpose. Silence gave itself to the sound, subtle and searching, as the pulse expanded to fill the explorer's awareness. He moved through the ship's narrow arteries with deliberate, anticipating steps, stopping where the monitor had shown them most frequently. He half expected the apparitions to greet him there, waiting with knowledge they refused to speak. Instead, only the pulse, more emphatic now, and the slight tremor in the hull accompanied him. The ship's belly creaked like a burdened memory as he traced the vision's paths and watched the damage map grow with warnings. He fixed the sensor to the next location, observing the failure points with almost clinical fascination. Tiny disruptions, invisible to standard readings, flickered on the screen. They made themselves known in vivid, silent language, undeniable signs he could neither ignore nor dispute. The readings chilled him with their persistence, with the unyielding assurance of his own unfolding dread. It spread through the ship like a controlled disease, already diagnosed, yet haunting in its certainty. "Hull integrity compromised," he stated again, letting the words hang in the charged atmosphere like ghostly echoes. They pressed in from all directions, his own insistent memories. "Entry 237, entry 238, he said, fighting for composure and comprehension. He stared at the sensor's message, the reading that proved the apparitions were more than vague figments of a frayed psyche. He walked to the next section, letting the beat of that message, unrelenting, unwavering, direct him to the other points, to the places it most wanted him to see. Light flared from the failing fixtures, a struggle against encroaching darkness that matched the explorer's struggle to grasp the full reach of what confronted him. The visions on the monitor, the damage on the hull, and now the impossible pulsing sound. They told the same story with such damning clarity. They left their bruises along the ship's skeleton, each reading a terrible insistence that demanded his attention. They called to him, unmistakably. The entity, a name he gave the mind behind it all, told him everything through its signs. His certainty grew as he repeated the readings, knowing them before the sensor did. His path took him to the heart of the ship, and to the heart of the truth. It couldn't be denied or ignored or interpreted in any other way. The entity communicated in ways only it could, persistent as gravity and haunting as memory. He marked each occurrence with the patience of a man resigned to knowing. "More than compromised," he whispered, the words ghosting along the narrowing walls. The pulse pounded in agreement, a rhythm so close it felt a part of him. He made his way down the corridor, dread giving itself over to understanding, one deliberate step at a time. He observed the structural weaknesses with a detached acceptance, a quiet clarity. He let them connect, a pattern he had refused to accept until now. He knelt at the next junction, listening to the ominous insistence that followed him like an eternal echo. The last sensors matched the others in undeniable confirmation, the language of the signs complete and terrifying and whole. He spoke the final entries into his digital map, giving each the gravity of his new awareness. The ship throbbed with the pulse of the distant intelligence, with its vast and enigmatic urgency. Every reading, every echo told him the truth he knew from the beginning. Not an accident, not a malfunction, an ancient presence, a cosmic force, a design of warning. The ambient sound grew into his breath, his pulse, his comprehension. It held the vastness of a universe and the intimacy of thought. The explorer gave it the attention it demanded, the fear and acceptance it required, as his last word on the map became his first word in understanding. Entity, he wrote, the pulse steady and infinite, a heartbeat of the void. The ship's ambient hum wove through the control room like the low, dull drone of hungry flies. The explorer stood transfixed as stars collapsed outside the ship, their light pouring out of existence with an agonizing slowness, all unfolding before his eyes. The displays quivered with nausea-inducing patterns as the scenes melted and reformed, now showing planets splintering under enormous unseen weights. He felt the vessel tremble with a specter's presence and shook his head as if he could toss the visions loose from his mind. "Did you see that? The stars, they're collapsing." His voice, tight with disbelief, cracked through the jarring transitions, each one more relentless than the last. A new vision tore through his mind, the ghastly image of entire planets shredding apart under invisible forces. "Impossible," he said, his voice barely holding against the strain. "Are you seeing this? The planets there—" He turned to the panels, hands darting from display to display. They flickered as if alive, mocking his attempts to comprehend. The lights above pulsed in sync with his racing heart. "Something's affecting the ship," he continued, his words quick and clipped, "or affecting me." The tremor passed through the hull and the universe froze, just for a moment. The pause only gave way to another kind of terror as amorphous creatures drifted through the ship, spectral and terrible, an incursion of nightmares. They phased through the walls, all ghastly indifference, leaving the explorer's mind awash with fear. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, recoiling from their presence. "Did you see those things?" He clutched at his temples as the ship groaned. More stars died in cosmic explosions, their violent end mirrored in the explorer's wide, unbelieving eyes. "It's like an apocalypse out there," he yelled, reeling from the escalating visions. One collapsed star gave way to another shattering planet, and then another. Each scene bit into his psyche, frantic and insistent. "This can't be real," he muttered, more to himself now, wrestling with the scenes as they devoured his focus. They pulsed through the control room in sync with his mounting alarm, overlapping fragments of terror and catastrophe. The panel lights buzzed angrily above his head, drawing quick, anxious glances. "What is doing this?" he demanded, his desperation bleeding through the air. His senses overflowed with destruction. Galaxies ruptured, stars exploded, the entire cosmos seemed to breathe its last in a parade of silent terror. His own breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. "It's ripping everything apart," he said, louder now, more certain. "Some force, it's destroying everything." The corridors of the ship flickered with the horrid light of dying suns, each flicker a new layer of despair. He stumbled through the control room, bracing himself against the walls as they seemed to shake under the assault. "Is it a message?" he said, the doubt in his voice almost palpable. "Are you trying to tell me something?" The ship felt like it was being torn asunder, yet the panels showed no readings, no indication of the chaos that bled through his mind. His mind pushed back, resilient but waning. With each devastating vision, he felt his own grip slipping. "It doesn't make sense," he said, fighting to stay grounded. "None of this is on the scans, none of this is real." But real or not, the projections tore at him, one apocalyptic vision after another, until even the air in the room felt alive with their presence. Equipment flared in fits of blinding light, then darkened to nothingness, only to flare again in relentless syncopation with the exploding stars. The ship echoed with its own droning hum, weaving itself into the terror of the scene. He stumbled, breathless, his cries lost to the soundless destruction all around him. The room pitched with the force of his disbelief. He cried out for the visions to stop as the onslaught burned through the last of his composure. "Enough," he shouted, covering his eyes, his hands, his head. "I can't." Each breath broke against the next word, shattered like the universe he saw, or thought he saw, or didn't want to see. "I can't take this." Then, in a stillness more terrifying than any vision, he understood. The universe didn't collapse, but bent, just slightly, just long enough. "There's something out there," he whispered. "Something intelligent." The stillness hung, thin and fragile, before the next surge. "What do you want?" he shouted, knowing it would answer, knowing it already had. The lights in the control room pulsed one last time and dimmed, dropping the explorer into a world of shifting shadow and stillness. He leaned against the panel and exhaled as the barrage halted for the first time. The sudden absence of visions left an empty terror in their wake, and his hands shook as he swiped sweat from his brow. Just as he began to breathe again, a projection crystallized in front of him. Alien schematics, interwoven with strange scientific symbols, glimmered with haunting precision. "I understand now," he murmured, as if the words themselves were uncertain whether to exist. The explorer leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The schematics were unearthly, elegant in their complexity. They floated in the air, as clear as they were impossible, a display of sharp, cold light in the dim control room. His mouth opened and closed, and the silence was so deep he could hear his own heart beating. He wiped his brow again, more from instinct than necessity. The patterns remained, unwavering, while the rest of the world fell away. "I understand now," he repeated, this time with the ghost of confidence. He fumbled for the panels, the sudden cessation of chaos a disorder of its own. His voice found its way back to him, technical and clipped and nearly breathless. "Capture all of this," he ordered the empty room. "Record it all." He moved his hands across the displays, shaky but deliberate, inputting commands with renewed urgency. The stabilized lights cast his long shadow against the wall, making him seem almost spectral himself. "These symbols," he said, gesturing to the impossible projection, "they're beyond anything we've seen. No human intelligence could—" His voice trailed off as his gaze returned to the schematics. Each line, each symbol was meticulous, crafted with an artistry that defied his understanding. "This is incredible," he whispered, "but it's still a warning." The lines blurred at their edges as they seared themselves into his vision, not out of chaos, but of brilliance. His fingers danced across the panels as he worked to capture every flicker of light, every trembling nuance of the schematics. The ship's low hum grew louder, vibrating the air between his breaths. It echoed in the hollow of his chest, like an unanswered call. "There's no way this is real," he murmured, his eyes wide with a desperation to know, to solve, to comprehend. The projection began to quiver at its edges, reforming, almost breathing. Panels started to flicker with static, like the ghosts of the data they'd held. The certainty slipped from his voice. "I can't keep up," he said. "It's too much." And then the cosmic terror returned. Panels shook in their brackets, the hum of the ship bloomed into a violent swarm. Stars exploded across the displays, unfurling into chaotic symbols and patterns, merging and twisting into dark, unreadable forms. The spectre of confusion drifted back through the walls, a nightmare reborn. His words caught in his throat as the room dissolved into noise and violence. He pleaded with the schematics, with the symbols, with the presence he felt more than saw. "Tell me," he said, his voice cracking against the backdrop of new and vivid terror, "what is it you want?" The lights flared again, a blinding crescendo that blotted out the ship and the space around it. His eyes struggled to focus, to adjust, to make sense of what was happening. An immense intelligence wrapped itself around him, drowning him in waves of unreadable data, engulfing him in the deep and endless void. He grasped for understanding, only to have it slip away with each collapsing star. He turned back to the panels, less sure now, his movements frantic and rushed. "I have to capture it," he said, but the clarity was gone. He reached for the images as if they were tangible things, as if he could hold them in his hands. They slipped through his fingers, morphed and scattered, outpacing even his wildest thoughts. The schematics became tangled and strange. The symbols bled into each other until they were one solid wall of indecipherable noise. He was flooded with a volume of data that he couldn't control, a tide that swept away all sense of precision. His voice fell to a whisper. "I can't keep up. It's too much." The barrage returned with full force, visions merging into a single terrible collapse. The explorer staggered under the weight of its communication, overwhelmed but defiant. "I know you're out there," he shouted into the torrent. "I know you're trying to warn me." Then the projections split the air like thunder. Then they pulled back, as if granting a moment's grace. They taunted him with their speed, their quantity, their dark and ruthless majesty. "I know you're there," he said again, breathless at the breaking point. "I know you're—" The universe folded around him. The air in the ship's data bay vibrated with an almost palpable unease. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if to echo the erratic monitors, and the explorer's eyes darted from one shifting readout to the next. "These fluctuations line up perfectly with our approach," he muttered, barely above the throaty hum of machinery that filled the small dark space. His hands moved over the console with surgical precision, cutting through the increasing noise of sensor glitches. Numbers danced up and down, frenzied yet rhythmic, each pulse matching an upswing in spectral disturbances. The room felt alive, closing in on him, pressing the ambient sounds into a heartbeat rhythm that thudded through the ship and his mind. An unsettling tremor crept along his spine, but still he bent closer to a holographic display, its blue light casting ghostly shadows on the steel-grey walls, each shadow confirming what he already suspected. Their presence in this spatial sector was awakening something profoundly and terrifyingly anomalous. With a deliberate calmness, the explorer punched in new search parameters, and the console emitted a rapid series of blips as if trying to keep pace with his thoughts. He murmured to himself, more a release of tension than anything meant for the log. "That's impossible, but it's all here." His voice reverberated in the near emptiness. Line graphs on one screen went jagged and wild. An array of symbols blinked on another, urgent and unreadable. He swiped through layers of visual chaos, cross-referencing energy spikes with positional data, while a vibrating tension settled over him. "Come on, show me what you are," he said, almost pleading with the numbers that seemed to toy with him. A row of digits flickered in and out, phasing like static overlaid on reality itself. He rubbed his temples, then shouted over the electronic tumult, "Don't tell me you're a system error." But he knew better. Each anomaly was too distinct, too coincidental with their trajectory. The metrics had the mocking certainty of a preordained pattern.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.